Camilla, our Queen Consort. She has single-handedly won over the British public against all odds.
Charles and Camilla, may God bless you both.
She's now a much-loved and much-anticipated queen.
Everyone that met her said, God, she's wonderful, she's so funny, she's so magical.
Elegant, sophisticated, and hugely relatable.
She's very much a family figure. She's a mother, she's a grandmother, and she's a wife, and a supportive wife at that.
Camilla's route from national villain to national treasure has taken decades.
She had to show great strength of character to get through that enormous intensity of media scrutiny.
From the royal family fearing she was unsuitable as a royal bride.
Mountbatten was absolutely horrified. He insisted that Camilla was excellent mistress material, but was certainly not wife material.
To the tarnished ending of another royal marriage.
The Prince of Wales has admitted publicly for the first time that he was unfaithful.
This must have been an absolutely traumatic period in her life.
Camilla has overcome it all.
Did you get down on one knee to propose?
So how has she won over the nation?
It's a remarkable transformation for her, because she was a woman who was probably content to be in the background, and now she's one of the most famous people in the world.
What's the secret of her success?
The way he decided the problem should be handled was to persuade the public that she wasn't some bogey woman, but that she was a very important part of the prince's life.
Is Camilla's simple act of love and duty to King Charles the way to the nation's hearts?
If the Queen was able to forgive and forget, then the rest of the British public could do that too.
Tonight, Royal Insiders tell the remarkable story of how a nation forgave and embraced its new Queen Consort. The 9th of April 2005, Prince Charles finally ties the knot with the woman he's always loved, Camilla Parker Bowles.
There were thousands of people there who were just cheering for them, who were so happy for them. It was a really great day.
Together at last, and with the blessing of a supportive crowd, it's a milestone in the 5-decade relationship of Charles and Camilla.
I remember covering that royal wedding in 2005 and thinking, this is historic, this is momentous, this is Charles, a divorced future king, marrying a divorcee, something that I don't think anyone really ever expected to happen.
Camilla is at last welcome in the royal family. In the years since, she's proved an integral asset to the monarchy.
Camilla now does about 100 charities where she's president or patron of them. In the time that we've seen that she's become a sort of workaholic like King Charles. I think she's felt that the more she does, the more she wants to do.
September the 8th, 2022. The death of Queen Elizabeth has a profound effect on the nation and on her family. With immediate effect, Prince Charles accedes to the throne and Camilla becomes Queen Consort.
The Queen herself didn't like loose ends, and she wanted to tidy things up. And I think the Queen, a very pragmatic person, thought that for Charles to be a successful king, he had to be a happy one. She realised that he wasn't going to be happy without Camilla.
It had been the Queen's sincere wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort.
I think the Queen endorsed Camilla by making her a member of the Order of the Garter, and that's the highest honour she could bestow on her, and it made it clear that she was to be respected. She knew that if Camilla had this status, that would make it easier for King Charles.
The Queen was really fond of Camilla and thought she was doing a great job for the country, for the Commonwealth, for Charles, for so many people at the charities that she was working for, that she wanted to give her an award.
At the state funeral, Camilla wears a special item of jewellery as a personal acknowledgement to the late Queen.
Queen Elizabeth loved to speak through her brooches. At the service after Queen Elizabeth died, Camilla wore one of an open heart, which you don't need to explain. It's sort of linking with the person in a very subtle and quite moving way.
As King Charles takes on his new duties during a fortnight of mourning, it's Camilla who provides a steadying hand on his shoulder.
I think Camilla is a supporting role for Charles, and you saw that when she was consoling him when he spilt the fountain pen and got very frustrated. She calms him down in those sort of situations and is very good for him. I think that's her most important role, to really support him.
Today, the Queen Consort is at the heart of the royal establishment. But unlike the King, she was not born into royalty.
She's down to earth. She can help Charles understand what ordinary people think, because for 50 years she was an ordinary person herself. She had to pay her fines if she parked in the wrong place. She had to do her shopping. She was a single parent, and she is very comforting, and she's got a lot of common sense.
The down-to-earth qualities which make Camilla the ideal royal consort have always been part of her makeup. But to truly understand her, we need to revisit her family's own illustrious history. Broderick Munro Wilson grew up with Camilla.
She was slightly rebellious. I mean, she shared a room with my second wife, and of course smoking was a forbidden thing. But anyway, she was definitely smoking as a teenager.
Camilla's friends all loved her. She was she was always the one at the centre of everything. She was terrific fun. Boys adored her because she was funny and characterful. I mean, she wasn't a beauty, but I mean, I think she was approachable, and she was very, very popular.
During swinging 60s London, the 18-year-old Camilla Shand is said to have dived headfirst into the party scene.
She did have some jobs, like she worked at Colfax and Fowler, the decorators.
She didn't last a week. One morning she overslept after a very long party, and I think she was probably rather hungover, and she arrived late and said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry." And the boss at head Colfax and Fowler, who was a demon anyway, just absolutely tore her apart and sent her packing. And that was the end of her working career.
But she was never cut out to be a career woman. But I think she had a lot of fun in swinging London.
She was famously a party girl in the mid-60s, and, you know, she might go to 3 parties a night, 5 days a week. I mean, she was extraordinary. She absolutely loved partying.
The vivacious Camilla caught the eye of many of her peers.
She was not without her admirers, let me tell you, because she looked very nice. She was always beautifully turned out, and she had a personality. You know, she had things to say for herself. She was talkative. I mean, if you sat next to her at a dinner party, you were delighted because you knew you'd have a good conversation.
But this carefree period of Camilla's life didn't go unnoticed years later.
Camilla had had a past, and, you know, at times quite a raucous past. She was known, particularly in palace circles, for being a party girl.
The reputation of the Queen Consort's family goes back decades.
It is reported to have broken the ice when she met Charles by almost boasting that her great-grandmother, Alice Keppel, had had an affair with another heir apparent, King Edward VII. So she was aware of that royal connection.
It shows what an extraordinary family they were. Alice Keppel wasn't a sort of dark, embarrassing secret. You know, the fact that she'd been mistress to a king, this was something the whole family admired.
So here we had a situation. Alice Keppel was Camilla's great-great-grandmother. King Edward VII was the Prince of Wales's great-great-grandfather. This extraordinary story is in the background, and it seems like a mirror image of what happened with Charles and Camilla. It certainly adds a sense of symmetry to their romance, if nothing else.
It's not surprising that Camilla's great-grandmother was able to move in royal circles and for the alleged affair to have taken place. Her family have been on the fringes of the aristocracy for generations. Born Camilla Shand in 1947, she had a textbook childhood of privilege, growing up in rural Sussex.
She had a very happy childhood. She was the eldest of three, the firstborn, and then she had a younger sister, Annabelle, and then their brother, Mark.
Her father, Major Bruce Shand, was a real military hero. He was actually given the Military Cross twice, which is the most astonishing thing, a very, very gallant officer. Her mother was from a very, very wealthy family called the Cubitt family. The Cubitts in the 19th century had built much of central London.
She lived about 15 miles from me. And the great thing is that we were all in the pony club. Everybody had a pony, everybody rode, everybody hunted. We used to have little mini dances which would start at about 8 o'clock and go on to 12, where you'd dance for 2 hours, have a sort of buffet dinner, and then dance for another 2 hours, and then somebody would come and the chauffeur or somebody would pick you up at 12 o'clock. That was Sussex society.
As the daughter of a traditional upper-class family, Camilla followed the well-trodden path set out for her.
Coming from the family that she did, an aristocratic family, her father, Major Bruce Shand, very much respected military man. Yes, in many ways, Camilla's life was mapped out. It was never going to be overcomplicated. Camilla attended Queensgate School in London, a very prestigious school. She was known as Miller. She was known for being pretty posh, but also good fun, and at heart, a tomboy who was definitely happier on a horse than in the classroom.
She went off to a finishing school, 9 months in Switzerland, on the shores of Lake Geneva, where she learned to ski and perfected her French, but not much else.
There was no emphasis at all on doing well academically. I think Camilla got 1 O-level because she was taught to get out of a car while keeping her knees together. I mean, they really walked around with piles of books on their heads so they would walk beautifully because they were being trained to be wives.
At this time, the question of who would be good to marry within this world of wealth, money and privilege was obvious. A member of the royal family would be the ultimate catch.
I think society was more hierarchical, really, right up until the 1970s and the 1980s, and it's hard to realise how powerful the class system was in Britain in that era, especially at those echelons of society.
I think it was always expected that she was going to marry someone that would either give her a title or at least a double-barrelled name, and that she was going to marry up into those aristocratic circles.
But was this the life for Camilla?
Did she want to marry a duke or an earl? I don't think she especially did. She had a number of early boyfriends who weren't aristocrats. She had no particular ambitions to marry up.
The 25th of March 1965, Miller Shand's debutante party. It would turn out to be a landmark moment in her life.
She had a coming out party at Cersei's, which is just behind Harrods, which was one of the fashionable places to do it.
The rite of passage again for this kind of upper class English family would have been that their daughters would go through the debutante season. And that meant that they would go to loads and loads of parties and have loads of drinks and lots of food and meet lots and lots of men, maybe a potential husband. And that was the whole idea.
At Camilla's party, she was introduced to a striking young man.
She was then 17 when she first clapped eyes on Andrew Parker Bowles, who was a rather dashing army officer, about 7 or 8 years older than her.
I think Andrew Parker Bowles was what's known as a Deb's delight. So a Deb is a debutante, an attractive upper-class girl interested in meeting somebody interesting and well-established. And Andrew was your kind of perfect person to have at such a party. Very, very lively, although he had a bit of a colourful reputation, Andrew. But he was a very, very attractive and handsome man, a real catch.
Romance soon blossomed between them. Had Camilla found her perfect match?
Camilla was the one that got him. I think she thought that she knew his reputation, she knew what he was like. But I think she thought that she could tame him. But sadly, of course, she couldn't.
Camilla Shand and Andrew Parker Bowles started dating in around 1968. His reputation preceded him.
I think everyone knew what Andrew Parker Bowles was like. He was very much a swordsman around London, if you like.
By 1970, rumours were circulating that Parker Bowles had started to date Princess Anne, while still in his relationship with Camilla.
Andrew didn't necessarily finish with one girlfriend and then move on to the next. He had dated Princess Anne, of all people, and I think it overlapped with Camilla to some extent.
A year later, Camilla was introduced to Prince Charles by their mutual friend, Lucia Santa Cruz. The beginnings of Camilla's long relationship with the heir to the throne had a modest start.
Lucia knew exactly what the situation was with Andrew Parker Bowles and Camilla, and she didn't think her friend was being treated properly. So she decided that it would be a good idea to introduce Camilla to Charles.
Andrew Parker Bowles was often away on army tours. They took him all over the world, to Northern Ireland, of course, at that time, too. And in 1972, Charles was on terra firma. He had by then been spending time in the Navy, but he was doing a long posting in the UK. That with Andrew away, it sort of cleared the way for the two of them to spend a lot of time together.
Charles actually himself told me a wonderful story about going out with a girl who was obviously Camilla, and he really wanted to impress her. So he ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. And Charles just sort of moved his hand and knocked the whole bottle over. And he said he was so humiliated trying to impress this girl and then knocking over this expensive bottle of wine.
I think what attracted Charles to Camilla was the fact that she was not overawed by him at all. The fact that she was going out with the Prince of Wales, you know, he could have been Joe Bloggs. She didn't care.
He loved the fact that Camilla was fun and could be a bit frivolous and carefree. She was very different to the other debutantes on the scene at the time, and certainly some of the women that Charles had been linked with. And she was something of a breath of fresh air. And when they did start dating, Charles was, you know, absolutely blown away by her. I think that storyline is really well captured in the Crown, where you can see that he falls for her very, very heavily.
During the third series, Prince Charles's feelings for Camilla were portrayed in this heartfelt and moving scene.
And there's a feeling I've never had before. A sense of safety and belonging. And all that loneliness having vanished. It was all rather miraculous. I think you are miraculous.
During 1972, their relationship is said to have blossomed.
Camilla went down to Broadlands on several occasions during those 6 months and had lovely weekends with Charles there. They were both very horsey. They both, they had a lot in common, Charles and Camilla.
But senior royals are reported to have had our future king and queen consort's romance under scrutiny. Among them was Charles's beloved mentor and great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten.
Charles had discussed the possibility of turning this intense relationship with Camilla into marriage, and Mountbatten was absolutely horrified. He insisted that Camilla was excellent mistress material, but was certainly not wife material, that it was impossible.
Why would Camilla Shand, an educated woman from a privileged family who moved in the right circles, be deemed unsuitable for the future king?
Mountbatten, his view was that whoever he married, if they weren't royalty themselves, then they should be of very noble birth, and however well-born Camilla was, she wasn't a member of the aristocracy.
They were both very young, too young for Charles probably. He was advised to sow some wild oats by his uncle, Lord Mountbatten.
But the bigger problem was that everyone, from Mountbatten up to the Queen, was terrified that she had a past. She had too many pasts.
It looks odd, 40 years on, to think that he could only marry somebody without a past, which again seems rather anachronistic now, but it was thought that he had to marry a young woman who as it were, was completely pure, almost virginal.
If modern standards had applied at the time, could it have been a very different story for Charles and Camilla?
Well, I think the world has moved on, and I don't think anybody cares now whether someone happens to be the daughter of an earl or just a normal person, as long as they've got the makeup to be able to deal with the job. I don't think the fact that they're commoners makes a jot of difference.
When Meghan married Harry, she was a divorcee. When the Queen came to the throne, divorcees were not accepted at court. It was unthinkable. The Queen's own sister couldn't marry a divorcee. Her uncle had had to give up the throne because he wanted to marry a divorcee.
Back in 1972, when Charles and Camilla were first seeing each other, some royal observers say senior members of the royal family were not happy with the relationship.
In the month that he's been with Minerva in the Caribbean, he several times visited the Bahamas Islands. But this was the first time he'd made an official visit.
It was really the palace who made sure that this sort of fledgling 6-month blossoming romance never really got off the ground. Charles was very deliberately sent off to the West Indies with the Royal Navy, where he was posted for 8 months.
This tense scene from The Crown dramatises an imaginary meeting between the Queen Mother and Lord Mountbatten.
How shall we handle this?
Well, I can take care of Charles. Nice long posting overseas will bring him to his senses. I'll speak to everyone at the Admiralty. 8 months on the other side of the world, it'll soon go away.
Could there have been another explanation why the relationship didn't work out? At this time, Charles was said to be an uncertain figure himself. Did he simply not take his chance and propose?
Charles never told Camilla how he felt. I'm sure she was aware of how he felt when they were together for those 6 months, but he never expressed it. He certainly never discussed marriage with her.
Whatever the truth, Charles was by now more than 4,000 miles away. 3 months later, he would receive a letter that would turn his world upside down.
He was on a long tour of the Caribbean islands when he received a letter from Camilla that she was and had accepted Andrew Parker Bowles's proposal of marriage, and that they were going to marry that summer.
He was absolutely devastated, heartbroken.
He realised quite literally that he had missed the boat with Camilla, and he wrote to say how regretful and how sorry he was at the demise of what he called a peaceful and happy relationship, which I think indicates quite clearly that he did have something special with Camilla. He had something with her that he didn't have with anyone else.
With their romance seemingly over, Camilla fell back into the arms of Andrew Parker Bowles, and the start of her journey into years of a complicated and unfaithful marriage.
Their marriage was very, very happy in the beginning. It's just that Andrew couldn't keep his trousers on.
She wrote a very rude message in lipstick on the windscreen and let the tyres down.
By 1973, our new Queen Consort had made the profound decision to end her romance with the future king. Its implications have reverberated for 5 decades. Charles was on a Royal Navy tour in the West Indies when he received her letter saying that their relationship was seemingly over.
I don't think Camilla quite realised the depth of Prince Charles's feelings for her. I think she thought, he's too young for me, he can't marry me, I need to get on with my life. And anyhow, I'm in love with Andrew Parker Bowles, and that's the man I want, and that was the man she got.
The difference between the two couldn't be more striking.
You've known Prince Charles for a very long time, haven't you? What sort of person is he?
Well, you know as well as I do. Everyone knows he's a marvellous leader and a marvellous man.
I've heard the quote that Camilla said that however much she admired and felt love for Charles, is it possible to love 2 men? I think the answer for her would have been yes, Camilla, it is, because Charles and Andrew were so different. Andrew found it difficult, certainly at that stage, to live without her. She was similar to him, similar interests, very exciting, a brilliant conversationalist, and she loved him with a sort of, an intense passion. I always feel rather rotten saying this, but Charles wasn't very sexy.
Andrew was a very, very promising guards officer. Some people thought he was a bit of a name dropper, a bit of a snob, but he always struck me as absolutely charming. I think that what Camilla wanted, a lifelong commitment from somebody, and a career officer who in some ways was in the image of her father, seemed perfect at the time.
Andrew might have been more alluring than Charles, but Camilla still had to contend with his party boy reputation.
He had a string of girls who were all, very happy to be in his stable, if you like. She knew his reputation, she knew what he was like, but I think she thought that she could tame him.
I was certainly witness to the fact that Andrew Parker Bowles was a popular boy, and no doubt about it, virtually everybody at some stage or other was joined at the hip with Andrew Parker Bowles.
There was one occasion before they were married when she was walking home one night and she saw Andrew's car parked outside one of her friend's flats and knew exactly why it was there. And so she wrote a very rude message in lipstick on the windscreen and let the tyres down. So she wasn't a complete doormat.
Despite these concerns, on the 15th of March 1973, it was announced in the Times Camilla and Andrew were engaged to be married.
I think he was forced into the proposal because he was very aware that Camilla was seeing Prince Charles. And I think he genuinely feared that if he didn't pull his finger out and make an honest woman of Camilla, he might actually lose her. He wanted Camilla to be the mother of his children. He could see a future with her.
In the West Indies, when the news reached Charles that Camilla was engaged, according to insiders, he took urgent action and fired off several letters.
He wrote to Camilla and pleaded with her to reconsider, but I think by this point it was just too late.
She was, I think, his first real love. And when you fall first, sometimes you fall hardest.
Major and Mrs. Shand, Your Majesty, and Mr. and Mrs. Parker Bowles.
The imagined reaction of the royal family to Camilla and Andrew's relationship was dramatised in a gripping episode of The Crown.
You're probably wondering why I've invited you all here this afternoon. It's a slightly delicate matter. Something of an imbroglio involving your son, Derek, your daughter, Mrs. Shand, and my grandson, the Prince of Wales. The families have been spoken to. The date has been set for Camilla to be married to the Parker Bowles boy. Good.
There's no evidence of how the news of Camilla's future marriage actually played out within the royal household. Regardless, Andrew and Camilla's wedding took place at Guards Chapel in London. It was dubbed the Society Event of the Year.
There were members of the royal family there. The Queen was there, the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret and Princess Anne.
People have said, slightly tongue-in-cheek, that the senior members of the royal family were there at the wedding just to make sure it really happened. There was this enormous relief in royal circles. This Camilla problem had now gone away for good.
It was a very glamorous occasion. Of course, the one figure who wasn't there was the Prince of Wales.
He was on his ship, and he wouldn't have gone anyway because it would have been very hurtful for him to see the woman that he still loved being married to somebody else.
It was a very, very significant event, and nobody would have thought this wasn't a marriage that was going to last for decades.
The Queen Consort's first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles produced 2 children, Tom and Laura. And despite their history, Charles remained close to the young family.
They managed to include Charles even in that intimate part of their lives by making him a godfather to Tom. Their lives were intertwined, particularly through polo and other social occasions.
Charles was often to be found sitting cross-legged on the sitting room floor with his godson watching television or chasing the children around on his hands and knees. I mean, he was an essential part of their family.
On the surface, the Parker Bowles marriage seemed perfect, and Camilla was able to create a loving family home.
When you meet Camilla, she seems a very, very warm and maternal person. She enjoyed decorating the houses and making them homely, filling them with books, lovely fabrics, not always the most tidy house.
She had a big social life in the country, and she had her 2 children, and she had her dogs and her family home, so almost everything she'd ever wanted.
Camilla's marriage was not all that it seemed.
I think their marriage was very, very happy in the beginning. It's just that Andrew couldn't keep his trousers on.
There are rumours that he actually had affairs with some of her friends as well. He was just had a terrible roving eye, and it made her feel very, very insecure.
He was a serial philanderer. He was at a dinner party and a young woman sat next to him and said, "Andrew, I'm really offended. I'm the only one of Camilla's friends that you haven't made a pass at."
Oh, God, there was huge amount of gossip. It was very well known and very well publicised that Andrew Parker Bowles was playing away, I think is the way we describe it, playing away.
Quite how she handled it all, it's hard to imagine, but handle it she did. I mean, it was a kind of an upper-class thing. One almost expected husbands to stray not long after they've taken their marriage vows.
You're at home with 2 gorgeous children, and he's in London all week, and you know perfectly well what he's doing. Prince Charles started coming round to Camilla's house, and they rekindled their relationship, and it seemed a natural thing to do.
By the late 1970s, Camilla was said to be seeing Charles again.
Andrew is a very good example of the typical upper-class Englishman. I don't think he liked the fact that Camilla was drawn back to Charles, but he was a great friend of Charles. It was one of those things that happened in life, and as long as it didn't get in the newspapers, he really wasn't bothered.
Everything changed in July 1980 when Prince Charles started dating Lady Diana Spencer.
You can tell. Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you. Well, it is, naturally.
They started courting almost immediately. It was a rather prim and very old-fashioned courtship. They had very few actual moments together. They scarcely knew one another.
After 6 months, it was announced that Charles and Diana were engaged.
11 a.m., Buckingham Palace. The beginning of a day to remember. The long-awaited, much-written-about engagement had happened.
He's getting on a bit, isn't it? About time we got married.
And this was the first chance to see the ring of sapphires and diamonds.
I believe the relationship between Charles and Camilla continued right up to 1981. I've spoken to people who confirmed this, that I don't know how to put this delicately, but Camilla and Charles had a sort of, they had a last night together in the week before the royal wedding in 1981. It was a sort of, a farewell tryst.
It's reported that Prince Charles has denied these claims.
Camilla stepped back and their romance, the physical side of their attachment ended, and he was faithful, at least to start with, to Lady Diana. I mean, here we had the Prince of Wales, a rather dashing and glamorous figure himself, then known as Action Man in the popular press, and this extremely striking and beautiful young woman. And the whole country got swept up in it.
Oh, Lady Di, could you wave?
With characteristic good nature, Camilla accepted that she must step back from Charles's life, while encouraging him to move forward with Diana.
In that period, Charles's life was difficult and he knew he was under pressure to find a wife, and Camilla thought she'd be perfect for Prince Charles.
But before the wedding had even taken place, there were signs the prince and his future bride may not have been the perfect match it initially seemed.
If you look back at that engagement interview, you can see that they're really not at ease in each other's company at all. They're not a tactile, loving couple. I mean, Charles just simply can't bring any emotion to the interview.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
Difficult to find that sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
While Camilla reportedly encouraged their marriage, that was as far as it went, according to royal insiders.
Camilla might have been the older woman who had dated the prince before Diana and who was in a good position to give Diana some counsel in those early days. It didn't happen like that.
Prior to the wedding to Charles, had Diana known how close her fiancé had truly been with Camilla? Were there warning signs?
Shortly before his wedding, Charles wanted to thank a number of women who'd been very kind to him over the years of his bachelorhood, and Camilla was one of them. Diana found this bracelet that Charles had specially made for Camilla. It had the initials GF on it, and she immediately realised that this was for Camilla.
What's more, Diana was said to be aware of the nickname Charles had for Camilla.
When Prince Charles was growing up, very, very popular show on the radio was The Goon Show. There were two characters in it called Gladys and Fred, who were like lovers. And these were the nicknames from very, very early on that Charles and Camilla gave each other.
It really, hurt her. And she became obsessed. She became obsessed with Camilla.
The wedding went ahead on the 29th of July, 1981, watched by a global television audience of 750 million people.
Probably the most flamboyant wedding anywhere in the world in the last century. I mean, an extraordinary spectacle.
And in the congregation, Camilla Parker Bowles.
And Diana knew that she was there. The history that Camilla had with the man that she was about to marry, and it's quite poignant, I think, that out of the thousands of people in St. Paul's, it was Camilla who Diana zoned in on.
Seeing Charles and Diana get married, she must have had very mixed feelings. I think she's still very fond of Charles, but I think she'd resigned herself to the fact that their relationship was over, apart from being a friendship one.
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
Diana naively believed that as a result of the marriage, you know, the mistress would fade away and we'd all live happily ever after. But of course, that never happened. You know, and contrary to what a lot of people have said, a lot of commentators have said, Camilla didn't go away.
As time wore on, cracks began to appear in the Waleses' marriage.
After the birth of Harry, the marriage really had started to unravel and go down very quickly. I mean, part of the problem was Camilla. In Diana's mind, Charles had never really given her up. She was a constant presence.
By the end of the 1980s, the Waleses' relationship was in serious trouble.
And I think Charles was so unhappy that he started, you know, pouring his heart out more and more and more to Camilla. And then, you know, then they rekindled their romance.
At this stage, it would have been well known to Charles's innermost circle of friends, certainly the social circles that he mixed in, that Camilla was back on the scene. And, you know, Diana had her suspicions.
1989, Ormley Lodge, Richmond. Diana and Charles attended Camilla's sister's 40th birthday party. Suspicion was about to turn into confrontation.
There was this extraordinary atmosphere that once we'd arrived, Diana arrived, and of course there were the friends of Camilla and indeed her sister.
Diana's bodyguard, Ken Wharf, was there on the night.
About an hour and a half later that Diana's voice was heard, you know, along the corridor near the kitchen where I was actually sat, shouting my name. And she said, "I just can't find my husband, or Camilla."
In 1989, our Queen Consort was being chased around a party by Princess Diana, whose bodyguard Ken Wharf was searching too.
We began an exploration of the house. Sat on a sofa was the Prince of Wales and Camilla actually talking. And Diana said, "Listen, please don't treat me like an idiot. You know, I know what's going on."
There was no attempt by Camilla to deny Diana's allegations. Diana didn't have any proof, but she had a hunch.
So they, you know, and all hell was going on upstairs because everyone was saying, gosh, Diana and Camilla are having a confrontation downstairs. And Charles knew that this was, you know, this was the moment to leave.
But of course, on the return journey home, nothing was said in the car. That really was the beginning of the end of the Wales' relationship.
But far worse was to come. May 1989, the Aegean Sea just off the Turkish coast. Prince Charles joined Camilla on holiday to sunbathe on a boat. They thought their liaison was a secret, but the paparazzi were there. The implications of the photos would send shockwaves through the House of Windsor.
There were photographs of Charles and Camilla in a launch in a speedboat together. Charles was shirtless, topless in his swimming trunks, and it was quite striking. And those really were the first time that the wider public and the media began to wonder whether there was something going on.
Many were now asking if Camilla's support of Charles had moved from friendship to something more romantic.
It was rather a reckless thing to do. Well, Charles was still a married man. And it was a reckless thing to do because it pushed Camilla right there in the spotlight.
Our future king made no comment about the rumours. But in the years ahead, Charles and Camilla would be subjected to intense media scrutiny.
I think Camilla must have been an extremely robust person to deal with the torrent of media interest, strange telephone calls, paparazzi following her around. That was her life.
By the mid-1980s, Charles and Diana's relationship was on the rocks.
Friends of Charles were convinced that he was actually close to cracking up. He couldn't make his wife happy. They fought terribly. On the surface, all seemed well, of course. In public, they were a great double act.
Camilla was always there behind the scenes for Charles during these rocky times. It was even said that their love affair had been reignited.
It's always been given out that Charles and Camilla renewed their physical relationship around 1986. I think they were together in the physical sense and every other sense well before 1986.
By the early 1990s, the Wales' marriage was crumbling as news broke of Camilla's rekindled relationship with Charles.
The Prince of Wales has admitted publicly for the first time that he was unfaithful.
Camilla Parker Bowles and her husband Andrew have decided to end their marriage of 21 years.
Camilla now became the story.
Camilla's poll ratings were abysmal. She was labelled a marriage breaker, a temptress and worse.
For somebody who was private, who'd been a homemaker, a mother, she had to show great strength of character to get through that enormous intensity of media scrutiny.
Camilla became the most hated woman in Britain, if not the world. She had photographers camped outside the family home. Camilla was suddenly famous, and she was famous for all the wrong reasons.
She kept stum, you know, and was very, very dignified about it all. Diana was always finding a friendly journalist to tell her story. She never did that, and I think that's great credit to her.
Camilla, always consistent in her support for Charles, now found herself on the wrong side of the biggest scandal of the decade, following a dramatic announcement in the most imposing of settings.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
After the separation, Charles and Camilla's relationship remained in the shadows until Princess Diana went on the offensive.
Well, then in the summer of 1992, which was the Annus Horribilis, Andrew Morton's book was published. This was the moment when Camilla was absolutely 100% outed as being, you know, the mistress of the Prince of Wales.
The book, serialised in the Sunday Times today, claims it was the prince's indifference to his wife that caused her chronic depression and 5 separate suicide attempts.
The first time she had press camped outside her home, this must have been an absolutely traumatic period in her life. She had, up until that point, really been relatively anonymous.
She's out. Period.
Her name was out, and she was going to have to live with this label of mistress, adulterer, marriage wrecker.
Despite this, Camilla remained uncomplaining and loyal, even when worse was to come. In January 1993, the People newspaper published the transcripts of a torrid conversation between Charles and Camilla, first recorded in 1989.
It was hugely embarrassing because it was almost lavatorial in its descriptions of their love for each other, what they wanted, how they longed for each other.
In June 1994, Charles took part in an unprecedented interview, which caused further sensation about their relationship.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down. Mrs. Parker Bowles is a great friend of mine.
Once again, it thrust Camilla in the eyes of the world. It made her marriage with Andrew Parker Bowles that much more difficult. It was out there in the open.
And if there'd been the social media around in the 1990s that there is now, I'm sure she would have received, you know, ridiculously horrible abuse. It would have been dreadful. But I think she was disliked.
All the while, Camilla carried on and remained fully supportive of Charles, even in the face of one of the most brutal public outings ever.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us
in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Diana set out to destroy the Prince of Wales, I think, so anybody involved with him was going to feel her wrath. And the obvious person to blame was Camilla.
After Charles's and Diana's divorce in 1996, Camilla's official introduction into Charles's public life began.
Charles had been very keen to try and ease Camilla into the public arena. He was tired of sneaking around, and so he employed a PR wizard called Mark Boland to help with this process and to try and rehabilitate the prince himself, because his reputation was in tatters.
Then a year later, everything ground to a halt. In the early hours of the 31st of August 1997, the unimaginable happened.
The Press Association announced with a news flash at 4:41, that's just a few minutes ago, that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died.
The argument ran that had Charles not betrayed his marriage vows, had he not abandoned Diana, then she would not have been travelling through Paris in the car of a playboy and ending up being killed.
To be seen in public with Camilla would be a PR disaster for Charles. But now, he needed her support more than ever.
Charles's first instinct was to pick up the phone to Camilla. And a desperate, desperate moment for him. There was Camilla at the end of the phone. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare for her and a nightmare for him. But she has always been very reassuring.
Publicly, it was a huge step back for Camilla. Her long-standing battle with the press and public was resurrected, and she was catapulted into the centre of a storm like no other.
Suddenly, the antipathy towards Camilla increased tenfold. Camilla retreated to the shadows once again, just where she'd been in the earlier 1990s. And that made the whole process of her coming out, as it became known as, that much slower and set everything back.
She was basically a prisoner in her home, which was near Highgrove. But Charles asked his chef, to make food to Camilla and to take it over. So, and he obviously was speaking to her on the telephone, but he certainly did not see her during that time.
They had to keep it very secretive, and sometimes I think he might be in the boot of a car or something, or driven in to see her. It was all very hush-hush, and I think eventually the strain told on both of them, and they thought it'd be better to come clean.
Could Charles and Camilla have a life together after this and win over the British public?
Rottweiler! I disapprove of the way Charles and Camilla treated Diana. It was despicable.
Camilla arrived not knowing whether people were going to be standing there throwing rotten eggs at her. And she was terrified.
Following the death of Princess Diana, it took a careful process lasting 17 months to reintroduce the future king and his devoted partner Camilla Parker Bowles to public life.
Camilla was a non-negotiable part of his life. Charles was not going to give up, abandon this woman who had stood by him, who had given up so much, who had been traduced in the media. He was determined that she was going to be with him through thick and thin.
Camilla's relationship with the British public needed some serious nurturing. Decisive action was taken by the palace with a plan masterminded by Mark Boland, known as Operation PB.
And the way he decided the problem should be handled was to persuade the public that she wasn't some bogey woman, but that she was a very important part of the prince's life, that she made him a better prince.
Discretion still rules in the run-up to Charles's 50th birthday.
Very gradually, she was brought out, and it was a supreme strategy. And people started to see her in a slightly different life, and everyone that met her said, God, she's wonderful, she's so funny, she's so magical. Word sort of started and spread.
In January 1999, the plan came to fruition outside the Ritz Hotel in London. Around 200 members of the press got the picture they'd all been waiting for.
It was just extraordinary. It was like the whole sky lit up with flashbulbs. That moment sort of sealed the deal.
By and large, the reaction was positive. And from then on, the process was able to be speeded up. And that was really the moment when Camilla began to be accepted by a section of the British public.
But would Camilla ever be accepted by the inner circles of the House of Windsor?
And then the next major step was meeting the Queen. It was a party that Prince Charles was hosting at Highgrove, his country house.
For Charles and Camilla, it is a milestone. The heir to the throne's long-term companion, now accepted in royal circles.
Interestingly, there wasn't a lot of briefing about it, except to say that the two women had spoken, they'd shaken hands, Camilla had curtsied, and they had chatted briefly.
With their reputations on the rise, in February 2005, it was announced to the world Charles and Camilla were engaged.
How are you feeling, ma'am?
All right.
Just all right?
I'm just coming down to earth.
Did you get down on one knee to propose?
Of course.
The proposal happened at Burkle on the Balmoral estate. I think that was quite significant because Charles is a bit of an old-fashioned romantic. Burkle is where Charles fished on the Dee with his grandmother as a boy, and he was very happy there.
I'm sure there were some die-hard lovers of the late Princess Diana who thought, no, this is not right. But I think the British public, by and large, welcomed this announcement.
On the 9th of April, thousands of people lined the streets of Windsor to catch a glimpse of the bride and groom. While Camilla was now an accepted member of the royal family, some uncertainty remained over her likely public reception.
Camilla arrived not knowing whether people were going to be standing there throwing rotten eggs at her. And she was terrified. I was there that day, thousands of people there who were just cheering for them, who were so happy for them. It was a really great day.
The civil ceremony was followed by a blessing at St. George's Chapel, which was broadcast to a TV audience of millions. After almost 35 years, Camilla had finally married her prince.
To Charles and Camilla, our future king and queen, may God bless you both.
I remember covering that royal wedding in 2005 and thinking, this is historic, this is momentous, this is Charles, a divorced future king, marrying a divorcee, something that I don't think anyone really ever expected to happen.
I think people thought, well, these people have been in love perhaps for 35 years. Do they not deserve a bit of happiness?
The Queen hosted a reception for the newlyweds at Windsor Castle and gave a speech that cemented Camilla's place in the royal family.
When the Queen gave that speech at their wedding party, where she said, "My son is home and dry with the woman he loves," that really was the welcoming of Camilla into the royal family. And if the Queen was able to forgive and forget, then the rest of the British public could do that too. We could give Camilla a chance.
Camilla was now the Duchess of Cornwall and wife of the future king. And for the first time, the public could finally see the truth about the Duchess, her loyalty and devotion to Charles, and to public service.
Very much a family figure. She's a mother, she's a grandmother, and she's a wife, and a supportive wife at that. And I think when people see her, particularly when she's with her dogs or just walking or gardening, and they see the relaxed Camilla, I think they see the real her, and I think they've warmed to her over the years.
She doesn't complain. Not ever during the 20 years has she complained about the nastiness that has arisen around her. She just feels that if people meet her, they can make their own mind up about her.
With the wedding of Charles and Camilla heralded a success, it was time for Camilla to begin her career as a working royal.
I think it's surprised a lot of people the way she has taken like a duck to water.
The Duchess has won praise by campaigning for good causes with a personal resonance, such as childhood literacy and sexual violence against women. Her work for the Royal Osteoporosis Society has been one of her signature projects.
Osteoporosis is caused very close to her heart because her mother and her grandmother both died with that disease.
She was very close to her mother, Rosalind, and she saw her crumble and get more and more into terrible pain, and it broke her heart, really.
You know, she can really identify with victims of that, and that makes all the difference because when she's talking to people, she's going through it with them. She's concentrating on a few issues with the violence against women issue. She's very supportive. She's been known to burst into tears listening to some of their stories, but she really sort of behind the scenes comes up with some great ideas. For about 5 or 6 years, she was involved on Radio 2, very much with the 500 Club.
The next day was Sunday again. Caterpillar ate through one by three.
If she asks an author of a child's book or an adult's book, would you mind coming and talking about your book? Wow, they'll be there tomorrow. And they also do fun things, like she takes them on buses round, and the author is a bus conductor. They come to her home in London and she makes some hot chocolates, and it becomes an awful lot of fun.
Camilla's place in the royal lineup has been well earned. It's becoming clear to everyone what kind of queen she will be.
She's 75 and it's quite extraordinary, her energy that she's got now. I mean, she has said, you know, most people have retired. I'm just really starting to get going.
Camilla today is supported by a very tight-knit group of female staff who look after her. They call her QC, as in Queen Consort. And I think it's all very relaxed, you know, when they're working for her, and they like her sense of humour.
All seemed to be going smoothly until the Queen Consort faced trouble from an unexpected quarter, Prince Harry. January 2023, her stepson publishes a strongly worded critique that Camilla played a long game, a campaign aimed at marriage and eventually the crown. Prince Harry also writes that stories were appearing in all of the papers about her private conversations with the princes. He says they contained accurate details unlikely to have been leaked by Prince William, that could only have been disclosed by the one other person present, Camilla.
I think Camilla's way of handling this was to look after King Charles and to support him. She's obviously very unhappy about what he said, but I think she's equally unhappy about how Charles would be affected and how other members of the royal family would be affected.
Are you hurt by the comments in Prince Harry's book, Your Majesty?
She also wanted to follow something that Prince Philip did, which is don't grumble, just get on and do things. And I think that's helped them cope with Harry's behaviour and attacks.
In a TV interview to accompany his memoirs, which has been seen in nearly 100 countries, Prince Harry insists that members of his family have leaked private stories about him to the press. He is looking for acknowledgement and responsibility.
There's no part of any of the things that I've said are scathing towards any member of my family, especially not my stepmother. No institution is immune to accountability or taking responsibility. So you can't be immune to criticisms either.
I think Harry's criticisms of Camilla in Spare were very unfair, actually. I don't believe that she deliberately leaked stories to the press or is in the habit of leaking stories to the press about him or about Meghan to try and make herself look better.
Both sides have been tarnished by these grievances, but Camilla has remained silent. Meanwhile, the nation awaits the King's coronation in May 2023 and Camilla's contribution to the proceedings.
There's a great deal of excitement and a great deal of hard work before the coronation takes place in May. I was told that Camilla had chosen the crown and chosen her dress, but no one's going to know what it's all about.
So this will be the first crowning since 1937, when the late Queen Mother was crowned at that time. So that's going to be interesting. I think Camilla will have a great role to play in steadying the ship, because there's been some choppy waters recently, and hopefully Camilla will be there helping Charles to really steady things down.
In the 5 decades Camilla has known Charles, she has been unwavering in her support and love for our king. Despite the bumpy road she has travelled, we now see her true value as a hard-working, loyal and true public servant. Camilla, Queen Consort, has earned her central role at the coronation, right at the heart of the royal family.
I think she's going to be a tremendous asset, because she is very much somebody who's going to be, there and doing her job, but not overshadowing the king.
She can help Charles understand what ordinary people think, because for 50 years she was an ordinary person herself. She will be there for him all the time to help him be the best king he can be.
In 1989, our Queen Consort was being chased around a party by Princess Diana, whose bodyguard Ken Worf was searching too.
We began an exploration of the house. Sat on a sofa was the Prince of Wales and Camilla, actually talking. And Diana said, "Listen, please don't treat me like an idiot. I know what's going on."
There was no attempt by Camilla to deny Diana's allegations. Diana didn't have any proof, but she had a hunch.
So they, and all hell was going on upstairs, because everyone was saying, gosh, Diana and Camilla are having a confrontation downstairs, and Charles knew that this was the moment to leave.
But of course, on the return journey home, nothing was said in the car. That really was the beginning of the end of the Wales' relationship.
But for
Not the echo, ikiga, nanemai, so
Sigue brillando esa Jesús. Aquí me rola saya, ne me sola, ubina la soke, me la yoga, me la nga, ini me saka, ini me salaya, ini lagi, usmelanya, usmela, solo para mama de.
To get through that enormous intensity of media scrutiny.
Camilla became the most hated woman in Britain, if not the world. She had photographers camped outside the family home. Camilla was suddenly famous, and she was famous for all the wrong reasons.
She kept stum, you know, and was very, very dignified about it all. Diana was always finding a friendly journalist to tell her story. She never did that, and I think that's great credit to her.
Camilla, always consistent in her support for Charles, now found herself on the wrong side of the biggest scandal of the decade, following a dramatic announcement in the most imposing of settings.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
After the separation, Charles and Camilla's relationship remained in the shadows until Princess Diana went on the offensive.
Well, then in the summer of 1992, which was the Annus Horribilis, Andrew Morton's book was published. This was the moment when Camilla was absolutely 100% outed as being, you know, the mistress of the Prince of Wales.
The book, serialised in the Sunday Times today, claims it was the prince's indifference to his wife that caused her chronic depression and 5 separate suicide attempts.
The first time she had press camped outside her home, this must have been an absolutely traumatic period in her life. She had, up until that point, really been relatively anonymous.
She's out. Here.
Her name was out, and she was going to have to live with this label of mistress, adulterer, marriage wrecker.
Despite this, Camilla remained uncomplaining and loyal, even when worse was to come. In January 1993, the People newspaper published the transcripts of a torrid conversation between Charles and Camilla, first recorded in 1989.
It was hugely embarrassing because it was almost lavatorial in its descriptions of their love for each other, what they wanted, how they longed for each other.
In June 1994, Charles took part in an unprecedented interview, which caused further sensation about their relationship.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down. Mrs. Parker Bowles is a great friend of mine.
Once again, it thrust Camilla in the eyes of the world. It made her marriage with Andrew Parker Bowles that much more difficult. It was out there in the open.
And if there'd been the social media around in the 1990s that there is now, I'm sure she would have received, you know, ridiculously horrible abuse. It would have been dreadful, but I think she was disliked.
All the while, Camilla carried on and remained fully supportive of Charles, even in the face of one of the most brutal public outings ever.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Diana set out to destroy the Prince of Wales, I think, so anybody involved with him was going to feel her wrath, and the obvious person to blame was Camilla.
After Charles's and Diana's divorce in 1996, Camilla's official introduction into Charles's public life began.
Charles had been very keen to try and ease Camilla into the public arena. He was tired of sneaking around, and so he employed a PR wizard called Mark Boland to help with this process and to try and rehabilitate the prince himself, because his reputation was in tatters.
Then a year later, everything ground to a halt. In the early hours of the 31st of August 1997, the unimaginable happened.
The Press Association announced with a news flash at 4:41, that's just a few minutes ago, that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died.
The argument ran that had Charles not betrayed his marriage vows, had he not abandoned Diana, then she would not have been travelling through Paris in the car of a playboy and ending up being killed.
To be seen in public with Camilla would be a PR disaster for Charles. But now, he needed her support more than ever.
Charles's first instinct was to pick up the phone to Camilla. And a desperate, desperate moment for him. There was Camilla at the end of the phone. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare for her and a nightmare for him. But she has always been very reassuring.
Publicly, it was a huge step back for Camilla. Her long-standing battle with the press and public was resurrected, and she was catapulted into the centre of a storm like no other.
Suddenly, the antipathy towards Camilla increased tenfold. Camilla retreated to the shadows once again, just where she'd been in the earlier 1990s. And that made the whole process of her coming out, as it became known as, that much slower and set everything back.
She was basically a prisoner in her home, which was near Highgrove. But Charles asked his chef, to make food to Camilla and to take it over. So, and he obviously was speaking to her on the telephone, but he certainly did not see her during that time.
They had to keep it very secretive, and sometimes I think he might be in the boot of a car or something, or driven in to see her. It was all very hush-hush, and I think eventually the strain told on both of them, and they thought it'd be better to come clean.
Could Charles and Camilla have a life together after this and win over the British public?
Rottweiler! I disapprove of the way Charles and Camilla treated Diana. It was despicable.
Camilla arrived not knowing whether people were going to be standing there throwing rotten eggs at her. And she was terrified.